Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I want to first of all congratulate the Minister for listening very carefully to the views that have been expressed in the House tonight and considering them, I think, appropriately and responding to them. He hasn't responded to all of them yet, but I'm sure that he'll finish that off. I only got one out of my 3 SOPs commented on. I was hoping to get all 3. Thank you very much for that contribution. We were doing so well on this bipartisan approach until then, but I am pleased to see that all the issues have been taken seriously, even if they're not agreed on. I want to start with the SOP in my name that the Minister has referred to, and that is the SOP that says that Clause 10 should have a new paragraph C added, which is to appoint a recovery coordinator to be appointed to carry on the powers of a civil defence controller should that be necessary. And the reason that I've moved that SOP, and it was quite surprising that the Minister has disregarded it so swiftly and said that the local authorities don't need it, is because our 3 mayors made a joint statement to say that this position actually lapses when the emergency provisions lapse at this stage still tomorrow midday, and that the mayors of our 3 regions would not support this legislation as they had seen it in draft form if such a provision was not included. So I thought the Minister may have overlooked it in his haste. He's had just only a few hours really to think up the bill and put it together and do all the work and consultation he has with other parties. I thought he may have admitted it. The mayors have put out a statement that is on the wire now as being the most current position they have on the legislation. They, in their view, the appointment of a controller who has the ability to direct rather than to suggest could be a critical factor in the success of our recovery plan. I was amazed that the Minister concluded that the mayors would be able to do that. A mayor cannot direct an organisation outside their own local authority to comply with their wishes, even if they're appointed a commissioner, because the commissioners in this legislation do not have that authority. In my view, there will be some situations where the ability to direct is important, and that civil defence position seems to me to be the appropriate one, and that was certainly the point the mayors made. So I look forward to hearing from the Minister if he has overlooked that statement by our 3 mayors saying they considered this legislation would not be supported by them unless that position was included in it, and if he would be, he might have more news than me. He might have spoken to the 3 mayors on that particular point more recently than their press statement indicated. The second SOP that I want to refer to is actually in my name, but I'm moving the supplementary order paper on behalf of the Honourable Jim Anderton, who, as we speak, is hosting a public meeting in Christchurch looking out at the historic buildings, the architectural concerns that many have raised, and really starting the community conversation about the vision that we need to talk about and share as in regard to the future shape of our city. So my amendment is to Clause 3B of the legislation, and it inserts the following words: acknowledging that an important priority for the response is to enable the preservation and restoration of Canterbury's architectural and cultural heritage. That's the first insertion, and the second one is those words come in after the words "to the Canterbury earthquake." So this is quite a significant omission from the original draft legislation, and it seems to me to be one of the most important concerns that is being raised in our community at the moment. What is Canterbury in the future going to look like? We have already seen a lot of our historic buildings threatened. Some have already been pulled down. There is a huge debate about whether they were pulled down too early. If the Commission has no guidance at all from this House about what we see as important in regards to our architecture, our heritage, our historic buildings, then they would be quite correct in presuming Parliament didn't care about it because we hadn't put it in the legislation. In my view, it is critical that we have the backing of this entire House for that message to go from here to Canterbury and to the Commissioners. So that addition will resolve that omission. Mr Chairman, the final SOP that I have moved is an amendment to clause 11, and that is to resolve the situation that I mentioned in both the first reading and the second reading, and with regard to the skills that will be required of the Commissioners, even when, Mr Chairman,
Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Even when the government abolished ECAN, abolished our democratically elected regional council, at least they put in the replacement legislation a description of the skills that they thought would be necessary in order to do the job that we previously voted for, but we now have appointed commissioners to do. At least they had a skill set described in the legislation. This legislation doesn't have that, and in my view it would not only be useful guidance for the Minister to have a view from Parliament about the sort of skills that we consider the Commissioners should have, but it would also be another opportunity to send a message to New Zealand, particularly to Canterbury and to the Commissioners themselves, about what we think are important roles for them to undertake, what we think are priorities. So I have prepared a list, and I'd be very happy for the Minister to make any deletions or additions if he thought the list was too long, if he doesn't think we're going to be able to find people who have that range of capabilities, or if some of them are more operational skills and expertise that he might consider less appropriate in Commissioners but more appropriate in staff. I'd be really happy to have that discussion and alter it accordingly, rather than see the entire list voted down by this Parliament, which I think would remove the opportunity both for that skill set to be defined and also that message to go to our home territory. So the list of skills that I consider important to have included in the legislation include knowledge of civil defence matters, tikanga Māori as it applies in the Canterbury region, knowledge of Canterbury region itself and its people, public health issues, water resource management, heritage architecture, small and medium enterprises and infrastructure. So that's quite a big range of issues, but they are all really important. They're not in any particular order of importance in terms of the ranking that I've given them. They're just A to H, but they are certainly the skill set that I think need to be defined, not just in terms of this debate, but actually in the legislation. Mr Chairman, the final point I want to make in this committee stage is that I had a very useful discussion with the Honourable Nick Smith in relation to an issue that's right at the very start of this legislation in Part 1, Clause 4, when it defines the Canterbury earthquake, and people will probably say, well, that's blindingly obvious. We've heard about it on the news. I know it has been mentioned a couple of times outside our region. It's certainly all we talk about at the moment in our region. But the Canterbury earthquake is defined as the earthquake that occurred on 4 September 2010 in Canterbury and includes all of its aftershocks. Minister Smith is far more qualified in this area than I will ever be because of his training at the finest university in the country. And he has assured me that except for medical studies, and he has assured me that the second earthquake, which was on Wednesday the 8th of September, is counted as an aftershock. We don't count it as an aftershock. We counted it as a separate earthquake, and I want assurance from the Minister that the earthquake, which was centred somewhere near the Littleton Harbour Basin, certainly had a huge impact on Littleton, Diamond Harbour, Governor's Bay and Heathcote Valley compared to the first quake on Saturday, is covered by this legislation. It would be a silly oversight if it wasn't. It doesn't seem to me to be defined in that way because we have been told that it's not an aftershock, that it was a separate earthquake from a separate fault line. I've got no idea how many thousand years ago that fault line tremoured, rather than the 16 or 17,000 or whatever the one that was centred in Darfield did. But I would like the assurance before the conclusion of this debate that second earthquake is covered by this interpretation. Mr Chairman, I know that the time's getting on and we're keen to progress this legislation through to its conclusion. I